So welcome everybody who's here. And we are so super excited to have Sarah Caldwell Steele with us all the way from Whitby. Um, we're presenting this on behalf of the Institute of Gem Trading in Bangkok. This is the school that we run out here that's teaching gem cutting. And so we're going to be doing these interview talks every single Sunday until life goes back to somewhat normal. So I've got already two scheduled for the upcoming weeks, and I'm already starting to schedule for next month. So if you like this one, there's going to be more. Welcome, Sarah. We're so happy to talk to you tonight on Easter Sunday, which we're just discovering.
Thank you.
How are you? So we said how are you already, but yeah, I guess let's just get into it. I'll give you a small introduction, and then you can fill in anything that I missed. So Sarah, a woman of many hats, all black, geologist, gemologist, lapidary. She owns the shop that she's currently sitting in, which is Ebor Jetworks in Whitby, home of the British source of jet. And you told me you're currently working on your postgraduate in Durham, right? So you're going so deep into jet that you're inventing new aspects of gemology. Is that correct?
Yeah, so basically I went back to university in September this year, and I'm working on what I hope will be my PhD. So I'm looking for really a new method of identification for jet in the archaeological record. But in order to do this, we also need a whole new definition and a new nomenclature system for jet and other materials like jet. Jet is one of these terms that is branded about as an umbrella term, and I spend my time trawling the world telling people they must not use the term jet to cover just anything black and opaque, because there are generally up to about 40 different species of material that we're looking at when we're looking at materials that are described as jet. However, for the purpose of today, when I say jet, I mean anything that has been used for jet purposes. So jet is also, I guess, a verb in this case. So it's a set of beliefs and a set of practices that people all around the world, different cultures, do with these black materials. So it's a bit different today, rather than just talking about true jets. And a true jet is something that is made from fossilized wood with a secondary impregnation of bitumen. So we've got to sort of differentiate between jet as a group and jet as the material. So yeah.
And so if we talk about jet from, let's say, before the modern period, was all that the real jet, or there was simulants all the way back?
No, so simulants go back at least to 4,500, well, at least 4,500 years ago, we see the first simulants from a jet perspective in the British Isles. I don't know whether they're the oldest gemstone simulants on Earth, possibly. We don't entirely know why, and I'll show you some of the pieces in a bit that have these simulants. But perhaps jet was so rare and so valuable that you're not going to bury a lot of jet together, because these are grave goods essentially. Perhaps they're making simulants so that they can replace some of the beads in these items with simulants. So obviously the jet's important enough that it needs to be buried with the dead, but they're going to use other materials. And other cultures have used these other materials for exactly the same purposes, and they now call them jet. That's no fault of theirs. It's due to Pliny the Elder, that many different words always translate as jet in the British language. So these people call it jet. It isn't jet. So, but yeah, we see this going back into prehistory as well.
And so just out of curiosity, before we get too deep into the talk, how did you become so obsessed with jet? Because for our audience who may not know, you are pretty much the spokesperson for jet and kind of the, if I might say, the cheerleader around the world of jet. Speaking about jet, researching jet, obviously obsessed with jet because you're sitting in a room surrounded by jet. How did this happen?
I've been obsessed with it since I was 7. I've been cutting it commercially since I was 11. I love all gemstones, but there is no other gemstone out there that I have the interest in that I have in jet. And it's really interesting because I go all around the world speaking to other jet working communities, and there are sort of 6 indigenous groups of us out there in the world today that still work this material as a way of life. There aren't many gemstones that have industries that work it as a way of life. And all of us say the same thing: you don't choose jet, it chooses you. So I can't say any more than that, other than it is an obsession. It's a vocation for many of us. It's not something that we feel we've actively chosen. It's as if the material has chosen us in some way. So I can't explain it. But yeah, it is an obsession.
Perfect. Just before we get started real quick, somebody just asked if they could see your screen. I want to ask the audience, is it switching back and forth between my face and Sarah's face as we're conversating, or is it just sticking on one? Yes, it is. Okay, so it's automatically switching. Just wanted to make sure before we it switches. Okay, it's switching. Good, it's switching. If it's not switching on your computer, it's something on your settings, not ours. I don't know, but it should be switching. Some people say it's not switching.
Oh.
I'm not sure. Oh, they're on the phone. I don't know about the phone. Sorry, guys. Maybe it's a setting. Maybe if you turn your phone sideways. I'm not totally sure. Can you guys see the PowerPoints okay, though? On the computer it works. Yes. Okay. I think we're okay. Some people can't. I think if you're on the phone, maybe you can't see people's faces. You just can see the PowerPoint. So I'm not sure how to mitigate that problem. But yeah, I think the laptop is a better way. Okay. So before I hand it over to Sarah, I just wanted to give one little introduction that I found interesting while I was putting together some research in the last couple days. So as I'm sure Sarah is going to tell us, one of the high moments in history for jet was the Victorian period, in the UK at least. And one thing that I discovered that's kind of a funny overlap between our two topics tonight of jet and, you know, the practice of magic and the occult, the thing that I found was the word occult came into the English language in 1875 by Helena Blavatsky, which is right in the middle of, I think probably right in the middle of Jet's high moment in Victorian British culture. Is that right?
Yep. Yep.
So we kind of see, say it again?
Towards the end, but yes.
Yeah. So we kind of see this peak period of jet along with this peak period, at least in the modern era, of magic and the occult. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And there's definitely is some funny overlap in the late 1800s between jet and magic. But as we're going to see, that overlap goes all the way back until probably the beginning of time. So yeah, Sarah, take it away. Tell us what you got.
Okay, so I just wanted to start with a few definitions. So I've also already spoken to you about the difference between jet, the physical material, and jet as a set of cultural beliefs and practices. But I think it's also important to make a differentiation between two types of magic. So natural magic, so this would be the sort of magic that's concerned with the use of flowers and herbs and plants and stones. So that's the sort of magic that becomes alchemy and then obviously medical science. So when we go to the doctors and they give us a drug, we don't question what's in it, but most of us probably realize that we've got a mixture of plants and herbs and minerals, chemical formula in that tablet. So that's one set of practice with magic. We also have ritualistic magic. So ritualistic magic is an attempt by an individual to change the course of history, so alter their fate, in some way influence others, and this is without the intervention of a deity. So without a god, we're not asking God to intervene, we're generally participating in a set of ritual practices that's going to bring about change. And this is the sort of magic that saw 100,000 people across Europe and North America on trial for witchcraft between the 14th and 18th century. So this is a sort of magic that scares people. But when we're going to research magic and gemstones, we've got to look really at both types of magic, certainly from a jet perspective. So it's also interesting to realize that there are three sort of types of magical device that are used in relation to jets. The first one is talismans. So a talismanic material is a material that itself holds a property that's going to imbue the owner with power. So perhaps the most famous talismans would be Excalibur's sword with King Arthur, or Aladdin and his lamp. But most of these materials, when we look at them, seem to be gem materials, because gemstones seem to go beyond what is natural. So they're unusual shapes, they're unusual colours. And jet itself is a material which is seen to be talismanic. It can give the owner extra power. We also see amulets. And an amulet is a device that's going to offer you protection, not physical protection, but spiritual protection. So maybe the most common ones we use today would be, certainly from a British perspective, a four-leaf clover or a rabbit's foot, or even crucifixes can be seen as amuletic. They're giving you, the wearer, a sense of protection from evil. And then there are charms, and charms are usually spoken or written. I guess the most famous charm would be abracadabra. But we have others in usage like bless you when somebody sneezes. That's left over from days of the plague in the Middle Ages. So a sneeze could be the first sign of the plague. So you'd want to bless somebody and sort of say bless you. So we've got amulets, talismans and charms, and they're all used from a jet perspective. Why would anybody use jet? Well, there's a number of reasons, but it all boils down to its gemological properties. So firstly, jet is jet black, and black is a really unusual color in nature. We used to live in a world where we're surrounded by jet black things every day. That term is in common usage, but really, certainly up to the Middle Ages, it wasn't possible to fix black colors in cloth, and it certainly wasn't possible to make black paint. So black's an unusual color. And because of this, we see superstitions surrounding black cats and anything that is naturally black. Now, jet doesn't require any material-specific tools to polish it to a mirror-like luster. And if you can polish it to a mirror-like luster, then you can make one of these. And I hope you can see that. So that's a jet mirror. If you've never seen a jet mirror before, it gives a full color, perfect resolution, and it gives that resolution in sunlight, in moonlight, in firelight, and in starlight. If you had a device on your person 15,000 years ago in which you could see your reflection, a mirror, that would be an incredibly powerful device. Secondly, jet is highly triboelectric. So that means that when you need to clean your mirror, we all know you breathe on your mirror and then you rub it briskly on your woolen tunic. The next time you look in your mirror, you can feel power emanating from the mirror. What you're actually feeling is static electricity on your skin. It's attracting it to your hair. But that goes along against the laws of nature that you would understand at the time. What is this power coming out of this black mirror that I have made? Thirdly, jet has a really low thermal conductivity, so it always feels warmer than its surrounding environment. So if you wear it against your skin, often it feels warmer than you are. So it appears to be emitting heat as well. So you have this device that not only is it jet black, it's emitting power in the form of light, your reflection, it's emitting power in the form of electricity, something that you cannot possibly comprehend, and also power in the form of heat. This would make this an incredibly important talisman. But even more important than this is the only gemstone on earth that is fully combustible. So what better way to dedicate your amulets to the gods but to carve it of jet and set fire to it? And it burns in quite an unusual way. When it gets to about 350 degrees, the hydrocarbons in the microporosity of the material are released, and it swells up like a sponge, and then it disappears in a puff of smoke. So the primary usage of this material, and really the written word from about 400 BC, certainly right through to the medieval period, tells us we burn it. Now that's very unusual for a gemstone. How do we research a material archaeologically when the primary purpose is to burn it? That's really difficult. But maybe to understand the magical thinking surrounding jet, we've got to go right back to the Stone Age to get inside the mindset of those Ice Age people. I'm going to hopefully be able to share my screen.
Should be able to.
Let's have a look. Can we see that?
I can see it. Can you guys see it? And so let me just ask a question real quick, because you were just talking about burning jet. I'm guessing you've tried this, done this a little bit.
Yeah, accidentally. I mean, you know, we can't solder close to jet. It's got to get to about 350 degrees to burn. So it almost resists the torch, but just not quite. I tried to set fire and video a piece yesterday, actually. I was trying to do a little video to show you. And I had a piece in a pan for 30 minutes on the fire and it didn't set fire to it. So I lost patience with it after that. It's not
Wow.
actually that easy to burn it. So yeah, I'm going to have to experiment more with the burning, I think.
Do you have an idea about what does it smell like when it's burning? Is
Yeah,
it,
I mean,
is it
it
fragrant?
smells, it smells, I want to say like hot tar.
Oh,
I mean, it's a hydrocarbon. So like burning coal. I mean, it depends. Do you like the smell of burning coal? I personally love the smell of tar. You know, I like to walk past people mending the road and have a sniff of their tar. I like the smell of diesel fumes. So it's sort of linked to that. So there is something in the smell. I'm not saying it's an incense, but certainly it's been used for thousands of years as an incense and a protective aroma, essentially.
it's funny though that they thought to burn it even though it doesn't smell good, or it doesn't necessarily smell good. I wonder if that interesting and probably very different smell kind of makes them think that it's helping to ward off, you know,
Yeah.
evil or whatever.
Yeah, I'll come back to the burning because lots of later texts talk about it and the usages of it. But yeah, certainly burning of jet is important, but not necessarily for, you know, a perfume. It is more protective.
Okay, cool. Well, what do you got for us now?
Right, so if we go back 15,000 years, so these are Magdalenian culture items here. The one on the right, oops, hang on a minute, I've gone way too fast. Right, so the one on the right of your screen is a Venus. So we have many of these figures that are called Venuses from the Paleolithic and the Ice Age, generally really voluptuous ladies. For some reason, don't know why, the jet ones are all very flat-chested with very big bottoms. Perhaps that's reflecting some sort of regional taste, I don't know. And we don't really understand what these are. One train of thought suggests that they are fertility symbols. Other people think that they reflect a matriarchal society or perhaps a cult of Venus. Other people just assume that they're Paleolithic porn and the hunters would go out with their favorite, you know, carved effigy of, you know, their favorite shape of female. But what we can see from this is these people are capable of abstract thought. This looks like a Henry Moore sculpture. You know, it's a stylized female. It's not representation. The hole in the top shows it's designed to be worn as an amulet. It's offering some sort of protection to the population. On the top left is the Petersfell's hedgehog. Now, hedgehogs are quite interesting from a magical perspective because hedgehog spines and porcupine spines are a staple ingredient of witchcraft, the witch doctors' tool bags even today. And spiky creatures, they offer protection. You know, nothing really can attack a porcupine or a hedgehog. So this is probably an amulet for protection, because if you are wearing what to a, you know, Stone Age person would have been quite a well-protected creature, then any ill that is going to come to you will be repelled by the image of this hedgehog. And this is something that really endures from an amulet protection perspective. The bottom one I'm including because it's got a really interesting lapidary feature, which Justin will probably be interested in. This is known as the Petersfell's botfly larva. So reindeers have these horrible parasites, botflies. They lay a nasty big fat grub under the skin, and they're seen as a delicacy even today in some reindeer herding cultures. So this is again believed to be an amulet. It's not drilled front to back like the hedgehog. You can see there's two little perforations at the top. And what is absolutely fascinating to me as a lapidary about this item is this is a V perforation. So the person who made this, it would have been, if you know, somebody who really, a more simplistic way would have been to drill a hole side to side. This person probably realized if you do that, your amulet turns over all the time. And with a hedgehog, it's going to be rolling as you wear it. So it might be facing the wrong way. With a V perforation, it's going to keep this amulet hanging in the right position. Even more importantly, the V perforation is an absolute game changer from a lapidary perspective, because if you can make V perforation and then join it with a third one from the other side, then what you get is a device that can reduce 2 strings of beads down to 1 string of beads. And this goes on to become a really important feature, certainly in the Bronze Age, which allows us to see a lot of the jewelry items that we see in the Bronze Age. Without this really simple little indigenous discovery, we wouldn't see the Bronze Age pieces we've got. What we also see in the Paleolithic are items like this, and now I hope you can make this out. It's actually a negative image of a piece of jet, and it has on it the carving, really good image of a little horse. So this is a portable device with an animal on it, and this almost certainly would have been a concern with hunting magic. There's no point going out hunting if you do not have an amulet with you that is going to bring you good luck in the hunt. And this is something that we see in many cultures still today. I'm just trying. Justin, can you turn that screen off? I can't get back from screen sharing to video.
I think you turned it off. I'm seeing you now.
Are you? Hang on, I'm not seeing anything. Oh, can you see me there? Yeah.
Yep. So how old was that amulet with the horse?
It's about 15,000 BC, so about 17,000 years old. So wow. I see. British Isles is still under the ice sheet essentially at this period, so there's nobody living here. But I was going to show you, don't have time to really talk about Native American usage of jet. That's a whole other subject, but this is a Zuni fetish. So certain populations believe that it's possible to embody the spirit of an animal inside jet. Jet is a very good vessel for this. And the Zuni make these little fetishes. This is actually a frog, and it's a copy of a 9th century Mogollon artifact. The Zuni have their history in the Mogollon people, and they take good care of these. They feed them, they water them, they house them, and they believe that these can also intercede in some way, and the spirit of the animal is protective to the person as well. So maybe a similar sort of thing we're seeing there in the Ice Age with those artifacts as well. If I go back to the screen share, let me just see if I can do it now. I think I've, see? Yeah, oh, no. I wanted my big screen. Can you see my whole PowerPoint there?
Yeah, just click that little thing at the bottom. Yeah.
Yeah. So if we move forward into the Bronze Age, so these we have Neolithic, really good Neolithic finds in the British Isles, but they're not necessarily, they're beads, and it's very difficult to attribute amuletic properties necessarily to beads. But these are Bronze Age spacer plate necklaces, and most ancient prehistorians in the British Isles would say that the Bronze Age could have been termed the Jet Age because of these, and we have almost 100 of these known, and these are the items that have got those first jet simulants on them. So not all of the beads are jets, but what we're seeing here is the spacer plates, those larger pieces of jet. Inside those are these V perforations. So you'll see on the one on the left, they're able to reduce from 10 strings of beads down to 8, and then to 6, and then to 1. So you can reduce and form a crescent using this technology with the V perforation. Now we know that the gold lunarly on the right are concerned with the worship of the sun. So the thought here is that these items on the left are concerned with worship of the moon. We don't know for sure, but these are incredibly high status burials. They're almost female as far as we know. And they're also associated with other strange things like flesh tunnels to stretch. We think that the people had enlarged earlobes that they'd have jet rings in, also possibly labret pins in their lips. And also buttons, jet buttons, huge jet buttons. So these people really are valuing this material. It is a really high status material alongside gold and copper, and obviously bronze. Jet is the most high status material. And it's really interesting that we live in a world today that doesn't value black gemstones. If we look at an analogy with China and the fact that jadeite is still so incredibly valued and expensive, and that's because the Chinese culture has not changed for thousands of years. Here in the British Isles and Northern Europe, we've had so many invasions, we've lost sight of our culture. So if we had maintained our culture intact since the Bronze Age, I think jet would be, without question, the most valuable gem commodity in the British Isles. So it's all to do with fashion, really, how fashion's changed. But jet was an incredibly important material to these people. We know it's been used for ceremonial purposes as well. This is a Bronze Age jet mace head. A mace head from jet would serve no practical purpose whatsoever. You couldn't hit anything with it, it would break. So this is probably concerned with shamanic ritual. So they're performing a ritualistic magic using jet. During the Iron Age in Britain, jet seems to, well, we don't have as many artifacts. I'm not saying it falls out of usage, but we see a change of funerary practice towards cremation. You know, we see things like lips of cups, but nothing that has jumped out at me as something that is magical from an Iron Age perspective. But we do know that these people at this time, obviously we refer to them as Celts, and what we know about them really is told by writers such as Pliny the Elder, and he says things like the Magi, the priests of the Celts, are called Druids, and he tells us that mistletoe is the most sacred material to Druids, and they harvest it on the 6th night of the moon with a golden sickle. So these are populations that their history, this is northern magic, and it's rooted in natural magic, essentially, plants and materials such as that. The next major thing that happens from a jet perspective, of course, is the Roman invasion in the 1st century. So the Romans were already aware of jet. They're working it in Asturias in the north of Spain, working Asturian jet. What we don't know is we see lots and lots of jet artifacts from a Roman perspective. We don't know whether this is British jet, is it German jet, is it Spanish jet? And part of my research is looking at these artifacts to see if I can see where in the world these are from, so we can provenance the jet, because the narrative really changes if we understand where the material's from. This particular artifact is one of a number of jet gorgonia, so gorgon, this is Medusa's head. So this is a powerful amulet, probably the most powerful amulet from a Roman perspective. And of course, we all know what happens if we look at Medusa in the eye. She's going to turn us to stone. We know that she's decapitated and her blood spills into the oceans and gives us coral. So Medusa has a number of attributes that link her to gemstones. But these gorgonia work very much like that Ice Age hedgehog. If you're wearing the most evil thing in the world imaginable, a Medusa's head, anybody who looks at you and wishes you evil is going to notice Medusa first, and they're going to be distracted. She's going to keep the evil from you. She's protective against the evil eye, and the evil eye really, from a jet perspective, is the most important amuletic quality that jet can protect you from. It protects you from the evil eye. And we've all experienced the evil eye. It's when somebody gives you the evil, they give you an evil look. And we know that if somebody really hates you and they're giving you that look, you know, you feel physical harm. You know, it's not something to be dismissed lightly. You know, you can be really upset by somebody giving you these sorts of looks. And this goes right back through every culture. Every religion is concerned with the evil eye. This is a find assemblage from the London Crossrail development, relatively new find, and it also has a stylized scallop shell. The scallop is also symbolic from a jet perspective, and when I talk about Renaissance Spain in a minute, we'll come back to the scallop shell. It's also important at this time to note that we get the first really good scientific description of jet, the material at this period, in Pliny's Natural History. So the 1st century AD, he writes this. Apologise for my clock striking. And Pliny sets his description really out into 4 areas. The first part, he gives us a really good geographical distribution idea of jet. And Pliny isn't talking about British jet at this period. What he tells us is gagate, which is the Latin term for jet, is found in the river, valley of the river Ganges, which is in Lycia, which is modern-day Turkey. He also tells us that in an area called Lucola, it washes up over an area of 12 stadia. So he's telling us it is washed up by the sea, which is very much what we have here in Whitby. We collect sea wash jet, and also in northern Spain, the jet washes in on the tide. So this is a good descriptive account of how jet is found. He also gives us a really good gemological description. He tells us it's black and smooth, light and porous, differs little from wood in appearance. He said it has a brittle texture and it emits a a disagreeable smell when it's burnt, a sulphurous smell, and he tells us that marks made on pottery cannot be effaced. He also tells us it has a number of medical attributes. So he tells us it can dispel hysteria in women. It has a tendency to detect epilepsy. It can act as a test for virginity. And a decoction of this stone in wine is curative of toothache. And in combination with wax, it's good for scrofula. So scrofula is probably related to tuberculosis. There are only two cures for scrofula. One is jet. The other one is to touch the hand of a king, which is considerably more difficult. At this point, Pliny then goes on to change his tack. Now, Pliny is a rational thinking, scientific mind, and what he tells us is something next that is really quite contrary to nature. What he tells us is initially the fumes of it, when burnt, keep serpents at a distance. So it has the power to banish serpents. And he tells us it is a singular fact that the application of water ignites it and oil quenches it. Pliny would understand that this is not, again, natural magic being used here or any natural property. This goes against the laws of nature. And he also tells us the magi, the magicians, the priests, use it in a practice which they call axiomancy. They say that they assure us the jet will not burn if the thing that you wish to happen is about to come true. So if you're not familiar with axiomancy, and there are many types of divination, axiomancy is an unusual one from a stone perspective, because this is actually divination by axes. So we know how you do it. There's two methods. You heat up your axe head till red hot, you place a piece of jet on the axe head, and you watch what happens. So if the jet burns, what you desire will come true. If it doesn't burn, then it won't come true. So that's a yes, no answer. Quick, easy, jet's gonna tell us. The second method, we're told, is you can observe how the jet burns. So when it's, I said earlier, it sort of swells up in a sort of foam, maybe it will distort into an unusual shape. You can read this shape in the same way perhaps that we would read tea leaves. So we're looking at omens, and we're being able to interpret it. And it's interesting, the Romans, the Roman state practiced divination up to the 2nd century. Post 2nd century, it's actually outlawed. So this is Pliny during the time when the state is practicing axiomancy. He's describing that jet is used for this. So yeah.
So at that time, well, one of the things that I was just looking at earlier today was exactly what you just said. A lot of the actual Caesars were really against magic and had made it illegal, yet their, let's say, wives or the common people had a astrologer or a divination person. So this is kind of funny. And Pliny is kind of like vocally against magic, but he describes a lot of magical practices, exactly what you just said, in his book. So this is kind of a funny time in I guess in magical history.
Divination seems to be the one they turn the blind eye to. That seems absolutely acceptable, that you would need a means to know what the future is going to bring. So certainly that's obviously one of the primary. And again, burning it, burning the jet, he's not saying jet is fashioned into beautiful necklaces and beads. He's saying there is only, you're using it for medicine, and you're using it for divination, magical acts. So yeah, it's again, it's an interesting time. The Romans are using it for jewelry, but Pliny simply doesn't mention this. He doesn't even mention amulets. So yeah, it's interesting. They're also using it for grave goods, and that can be quite interesting. Can you share back to me, or do I need to reshare myself?
You got to share yourself. Steal it away.
Steal it. Let me see. Okay.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to show you, this is one, obviously this is probably 4th century, 3rd, 4th century British. This is one of about 20 odd burials of very, very young infants. They're known from Germany and the British Isles, really young children. And what they're buried is, and these, by this stage, these populations would expected probably to be Christian in the British Isles. These children are buried with a small ceramic beaker, and under the beaker is a tiny jet bear. And often the media reports these as the first jet teddy bear, the first teddy bears. So we have children buried with tiny little jet bear amulets, and also a coin to pay for their passage through the underworld. This particular one, this one is from Malton, which is about 20 miles from here. This child has one single jet bead. The hole is too small. Well, it could be a ring for a child, but the ring would be too big to fit on the finger. We don't know what these beads are actually symbolic of, but this tradition of burying people with one single bead endures from the Roman times right through Anglo-Scandinavian Britain into the Scandinavian kingdoms as well. We see one single jet bead, perhaps reflecting that jet is so valuable you don't want to bury more than one of it. If you've got one in the grave, that's going to be enough. So yeah, I just thought, you know, grave goods and jet, without grave goods, we would know nothing about jet. So I always say, you know, there's been no association with jet and mourning and death until 1831 and what the Victorians did to jet. But that's not really true, because everything we know about jet is because we have always buried it with the dead. When the Romans leave the British Isles, 4th century, we enter this period which we term the Dark Ages. And looking for jet in the Dark Ages, looking for anything in the Dark Ages is difficult, but looking for jet in the Dark Ages is incredibly difficult. But it is there if you look for it. Obviously, at this time, it's known by lots of different names. We don't know what the Iron Age name for jet was. None of the Roman writers tell us. Obviously, this is a material that's been used for 5,500 years. And we have no idea what it was called for the majority of its time. But there are some texts out there, and this is the earliest image of jet I found. This was drawn in 512. It's in a medical appendix of Dioscorides, and it's appendix looking at the treatments of bites and stings. And what this tells us is this material gagate directs to be mixed with the marrow of stag and then applied topically to a snake bite. And why I've shown this is because this is actually a pretty good representation of a sea-washed piece of jet. And what we don't know with these ancient writers, especially even Pliny himself, we don't know whether the material Pliny tells us is jet or another material. And certainly, you know, a lot of my work has been researching the Greek writers on the subject, and there are many, many different names and many different materials, all given very similar powers that may well be the same material. But I'm pretty happy that this early 6th century image is in fact jet. And I also spend a lot of time reading early medieval manuscripts, and particularly Anglo-Saxon manuscripts, looking for clues as to what we're doing with jet. And one of these manuscripts, this one is dated to the 7th century, tells us some really interesting facts on jet. So it has a recipe for a prescription, and I'll just read out what the recipe says. And it says, the material gagate, so they're using the Latinized term, is used against this. So this potion is used against elf and unknown enchantments. So elves, from a Saxon perspective, they believe all illnesses are caused by elves. So you get shot by an elf, and they know that elves are shooting everybody because when they find Neolithic Bronze Age flints, they are elf shot. Belemnites, the fossils are elf shot. So elves are trying to cause all sorts of maladies in humans. So this is a potion against elf and unknown enchantments. And they tell us you must grind myrrh, frankincense, and equal portions of jet dust into wine, and you must drink this for 3 mornings fastings, or 9 or 12. So the interesting thing about this is you've got 2 probably of the most well-recognized incense materials, frankincense and myrrh. It doesn't get more exotic, it probably doesn't get more expensive, it doesn't get more symbolic than frankincense and myrrh. And the fact that the Saxon author of this document is holding jet in equal esteem, you put equal portions of those 3 in here. And this is the first time in Saxon medicine really that we see anybody drinking jet in a medicine form. He also tells us that Jet has 8 powers. And what this writer is also trying to do is he's bringing together Saxon medicine and Mediterranean medicine that is coming into the British Isles at this period of time in the Dark Ages. He's telling us that Jet has 8 powers. The first power is when there's thunder, it will not harm the man that's carrying the stone. The second power is that whatever house Jet is in, there will be no enemy able to come within. So the third power is that no poison may harm a man that has the stone. The fourth power is that anybody who has a loathly fiend secretly upon him, if he drinks the stone in a fluid, what was secret before becomes immediately manifest. So this has the ability to reveal secrets. So, and this is also used in the test for virginity. We see, we see documents that say, women can have no secret if a man drinks jet in a potion. The fifth power is that anybody with a malady will be immediately better if they take the stone in a fluid. The sixth power is that sorcery and witchcraft does not harm people that have this stone with them. We've got a seventh power, and this is that you've got a smoother body if you drink the stone. Now, I've not tried this, but it's almost looking like it might be worth a try. And the eighth power is that no stone, if you have the stone, no bite of an adder, and obviously adders are the only poisonous snake we have in the UK, can harm somebody who has drunk this fluid. So the interesting thing about this particular text is that we've got 3 powers here that are uniquely Saxon. They are not reflected by any of the Roman writers, and they're not reflected by any of the Greek writers. So the first one is thunder, and that's top of the list. So, thunder is the most dangerous thing that's going to get you out there in the world. They don't know what the noise is. You've got lightning. So you say that Jet is protected against thunder is uniquely Saxon. And the second one is that it's going to offer magical protection of a dwelling. And this is important in my research because I believe that jet is ritualistically used in witch charms. And these are items that you nail to a door and you nail to a chimney to protect you from witches. And the other power is the one of revealing secrets. So I think those 3 are uniquely Saxon and the others are Roman. And we're seeing a mixture of the 2 in these artifacts. So I'll show you some of the Dark Age finds.
So it seems like this medieval magical use of jet's pretty synonymous with other kinds of, what I'm calling lapidary medicine of that period, like using it as a touchstone or grinding it up and drinking it or eating it for some kind of magical medicine. Have you tried ingesting jet in any way?
Oh, I've been working this, as I say, commercially since I was 11. I have ingested, inhaled, probably more than my own body weight in jet dust over the years. So I'm sure that as with all organic materials, this will essentially be in my DNA. It will be in the enamel of my teeth. Whether it has brought about any special powers or benefits, I don't know, because I've been doing it for so long. But I certainly haven't actively drunk it in a concoction. It does tend to settle on the top of my coffee as I'm working, and so yeah, I probably do ingest it on a daily basis. We don't know, and it's interesting. People often ask me, is it dangerous? Is the powder of jet dangerous? When we look at the Victorian jet workers, we don't see that they died from bronchial disorders. Almost all the Victorian jet workers died from alcohol-related poisoning or injury because there was nothing else to spend the money on. Whitby was a town of pubs and drinking, so it was alcohol that caused the death of most of them. So it's although it is a hydrocarbon, it doesn't have a high silicon content, so it's not going to give you silicosis. And the other thing to remember with jet is it's almost pure. It's a pure hydrocarbon. Almost everything in there is organic carbon. And in the same way, we've seen activated carbon in flour. You see black pizza bases. If you took an overdose, you would be made to drink charcoal at hospital. So, there's nothing to suggest that there's anything in jet that's going to do you any harm. Let's say I'll go that far. And certain authors, certain Roman authors, and I don't know whether anybody's watching, any of my Venezuelan jet working colleagues are watching, but they tell me that they use jet as a treatment for wounds and cuts. And some of the Roman writers also say they use it to close wounds. So carbon is very reactive. It also has antiseptic properties. So it absolutely makes perfect sense that jet would help skin conditions. So yeah, it's not beyond the realm of possibilities. And also interestingly, the manuscript I just quoted from, it was in the news a couple of years ago because one of the other prescriptions in there that was described as a treatment for skin conditions, severe skin conditions, was tested in the British Isles, and it was found to be a cure for MRSA, so multi-resistant strains of bacteria. So some of these medieval prescriptions are 100% they do work, and our modern medicine obviously comes down from these sorts of books. So yeah, I haven't tried, well, I probably have tried it, but not in a controlled experiment, let's say.
Oh, pretty interesting though. And side idea, jet pizza crust. This could be something for Whitby, maybe for the next.
You know, it would be a hell of an expensive pizza. That's all I can say if I'm going to start grinding my very valuable jet to make flour.
Well,
yeah.
side idea, just throwing it out there.
Okay. Yeah. Well, maybe use some of the simulants, see if they work. But yeah, so I'll just show you some of these sort of Dark Age magical, potentially magical things we have here. So this is a Whitby Saxon find, and it has, this is an example of runic magic. So that's a charm inscribed on an amuletic piece. So these are generally described as a for complete spindle walls. I don't know whether that really is true or not. I have, just to show you, let me just hang on, let me stop my screen share if I can. Can you see me there? I have made, I'm not the best drop spinner in the world, but I've made a jet spindle. And drop spinning relies on the fact that you can spin your staff and the weight of the spindle. You can then tease out the wool. So obviously the heavier the spindle wool, the better spin you get. And you know, I do question these as spindle wools because jet is incredibly light. We can use this for assisted spinning. I mean, I've managed to spin a little bit, but I don't think that really necessarily these are spindle wools. I think they've been misinterpreted by the archaeologists. But this one has Saxon runes on it, English runes. These aren't Norse runes, and it has 3 letters, and it either says L-E-W, no, it says L-E-U or W-E-R. Neither of these make any sense whatsoever. They're believed to be a male name, and the archaeologists have said, well, why would a man put his name on a spindle wall? You know, maybe he made it. But maybe the analogy would be, you know, when I was at school, my wooden ruler had lots of boys' names on it. It wasn't that they made it. It was, I quite like the look of them. Maybe we've got a Saxon girl thinking, I'm going to, put Ware's name on my spindle wall. We don't know. But there may have been some other magical purpose for this that we simply don't know. Now, I want to also mention a magic hill, if I can. This is Roseby Topping. It's about 20 odd miles away from here. And it's a really interesting site. So the name Roseby Topping actually comes from a much older name of Othenesburg. And this translates into English as Odin's Hill. Odin, the Norse god Odin, obviously important deity. And why this hill is interesting is this aerial photograph shows us that there are 2 rows around this hill of shallow pits. Now, in the 19th century, when mining jet was a prerequisite to support the Victorian mourning industry, jet miners went out prospecting the local surrounding area. There were over 300 jet mines known from a Victorian perspective. When they prospected Odin's Hill, they found that when they started to tunnel in through these pits, they discovered the hill was absolutely riddled with passageways. And when they got to the end of these passageways, they found jet seams. This hill has essentially been mined out by some ancient population. We don't know who, but this suggests that jet mining was done on such a huge scale in antiquity that maybe, the artifacts we have are just the tip of the iceberg here. And for this hill to be sacred to Odin, and this hill essentially to be a jet mine, were the Norse people mining, were the Saxons? We have other evidence to suggest that the Saxons were also mining. And I believe the Romans would have also had to have mined jet to get the quantity that they have today. But what we do know that Whitby Abbey was raided in 867 by the Vikings, and they did what they did best. They probably thought they'd discovered a rare form of black amber, because we know the community in Whitby Abbey are making jet artifacts there. Jet and amber have such similar properties, and obviously amber is sacred to Freya in Norse mythology. They do essentially what they're doing with amber, and they do it with jet. Now, these three artifacts, amulets, are from Norway. So they're taking the jet back home, and the best quality amulets are definitely coming from the Scandinavian homelands. Now, the two items on the middle and the right-hand one, they were grave amulets, 9th century, the long serpent in the middle, and a typical zoomorphic Viking design. These are amulets that are at the foot of female graves. The one on the left was a stray find, but there's one known from Bridlington, which is a town not too far from Whitby here. And this is described as gripping bears or gripping beasts. It's actually probably the saga of the god Loki, who's a shapeshifter. He transforms himself in one of the Icelandic sagas into a seal, and he fights another god who's also a shapeshifter. So this is a Norse god depicted in jet. All amulets not necessarily designed to be worn. Perhaps it was something you had in your pocket. You know, certainly something was seen in a grave association. This piece is an example of Norse runic magic. So we have an inscription on here, and it gives us the name of 3 men. And it tells us they're on a hunting trip, and it's asking to bring good luck in the hunt. And it gives us a date of 1221. This piece was found in Disco Bay, which is on the west coast of Greenland. So it just shows how far the Vikings were able to take Whitby jet once they discovered it. The other thing they took a long way were these. So these are probably what most people think of from a Viking or an Anglo-Scandinavian perspective when we think of jet. These are incredibly difficult to date. They're balance crosses, parallel arm crosses. They look not dissimilar to Byzantine crosses. Are they religious? Are they Christian? Why do they have this strange symbolism on them? And really not much work has been done into the symbolism on these crosses. They all concern the dot and ring, the circumpunct. Anybody who's familiar with alchemy would instantly probably see the one on the right looks very similar to the alchemical symbol for Mercury. And I believe that actually what we're seeing here is a hidden language. If you could read this symbology, you would know what this meant. And the position is very deliberate of these. And these are known from Greenland, Ireland, British Isles, Norway. And I think there's quite a large number of these known. No two are quite the same either. So the symbol, the dot and the ring, one of the oldest symbols in the world. It goes right back to the Neolithic, Paleolithic. And maybe there's a number of different ways to look at the dot and the ring, the circumpunct. So this is Pythagorean thinking on the subject. So they believe that everything in the universe starts with a single dot, the Big Bang, the I am, you know, the beginning of everything. And if you draw a circle around it, if you draw another circle from any point on the circumference of a monad, you get a dyad. And if then you use the crossover point, the third point, draw another circle, you get a triad, and so on until we get the shape on the right. This is a hexafoil. Flower of life, has a number of different names. Now, from a British symbology, magic perspective, this is an incredibly important device. We would describe this as a solar. It's very common in medieval, Middle Age, the buildings of the Middle Ages all across the British Isles. And a solar is a device that emits light. So it's something that's going to bring light. So you would carve this in a really dark corner of a room. And if you have a solar in that corner, then no spirit can hang there. You're not going to get a ghost hanging out. This solar is going to bring light into that corner. Now, this isn't particularly important from a British perspective. It is, however, incredibly important to my Spanish colleagues over in Asturias, and they still carve these today. Now, they don't call this the hexafoil, they call this the flower of water. And this is concerned with another ritual. This is the ritual of the summer solstice. So on the early morning of the summer solstice, so again, here a solar, again, this is concerned with the sun. The maidens, the young virgins, were encouraged to get up early in the morning, and they were to go and drink the virginal first waters of the springs, of the wells, of that summer solstice. And this design, the way the light catches the surface of the jet on this piece here, it looks almost like water, you know, a dark well or waves at night. You know, you can really imagine the water. And of course, jet's a material that is given to us by the sea. The connection is there. In some jet pieces, the dot and the ring symbolism just goes berserk. Now, the piece on the right is a Whitby artifact, and it's just one tiny fragment of a bigger piece. And I just wish above anything that this artifact, that we had more of it. We see a series of dots and rings, and they are joined by very deliberate parallel lines, and also lines that intersect into triangles. And we know certainly from an Islamic perspective, triangles are really important. Amulets, they intensify the power of the magic. So, you know, this, you know, it doesn't take much imagination to look at this and see some of these Islamic jewelry with the little bells hanging underneath it. You know, are we seeing something here that's related to that sort of magic? The one on the left actually is a Persian jet bead. This dates to between probably the 8th and the 11th century. And when I saw this, I was absolutely blown away, because initially I convinced myself that I was looking at star constellations, which of course these could be, you know, the jets representing the night sky, maybe the circumpuncts are stars. But anybody who's researched alchemy and looked at alchemy would maybe see, you know, that these begin to look alchemical, all of these symbols. Here, I think this is a text from the Key of Solomon, and it's an alchemical text showing us the design to put on a magic wand. So you'll see you've got circumpuncts, you've got double lines, you've got single lines. The image on the right, again, this is to do with angelic magic, this manuscript, but you see these intersecting triangles, these parallel lines, and these dots and rings. You know, these are all concerned with, you know, this sort of alchemical thinking. Two other Dark Age finds, the one on the left, the knot. So a simple knot on a piece of Whitby jet. This is a Whitby find as well. You know, the knot is associated with magic for time immemorial. So there are tales of sorcerers selling wind to sailors, for example, by knotting a piece of string. And for a light wind, you want to do 1 knot, and, you know, up to a real gale with 3 knots. So, you know, knots are symbolic. And even the Victorians still use knots in their jewelry as part of this magic. The item on the right is really curious. This is one of a number of artifacts that are very, very similar. Again, Persian. This is a piece of jet, talismanic material jet. It's carved into a trigonal crystal system point of the habit of quartz, deliberately in a quartz habit, and it is inscribed with what is described as a magical language. So this charm on this amulet, on this talismanic material, has not yet been translated. If anybody there can read it, I'd love to know what it says. But so we've seen all 3 types of magic here on one piece. Again, this is probably 8th to 11th century, this piece.
And was that piece, that was a kind of a Viking piece, or that was a native British piece, or do we know?
The Islamic one was found in Iran. There is no natural source of jet in Iran. Or there may well be, but there's no documented. I am talking to an Iranian gemologist that thinks he may have a source of jet. But this particular find is from an area which was a bead making center, essentially. So lots of beads there, but a large percentage of the beads found were actually jet beads, and we don't know why. You know, beads, you know, are important from a jet perspective. But yeah, we can possibly, so this town in Iran lies on the Silk Route. It also on the Silk Road. It also lies on the confluence of the Silk Road and the Amber Road. So the Amber Road is a route from Scandinavia that exists from prehistory, bringing furs and amber and honey down from the Scandinavian countries into the Mediterranean, where it's traded out along the Silk Road. It's possible that the Vikings are trading jet, once they've discovered it, down into Persia. I don't think we can rule that out, and I would really like to test these Persian amulets to see if they are indeed Whitby jet, or see where in the world the jet is from anyway. There's no obvious source. It could just be that they are Whitby jet charms. And there are such similarities between the Saxon, the Viking, and these Persian finds, stylistically, that we can perhaps suggest that there is certainly an exchange of thinking regarding them.
So cool.
Yeah. Sometimes it's going to come back to beads. Sometimes it is enough to be buried with one jet bead to imply that you may be a witch or a sorceress. So this particular grave assemblage here was found on the Isle of Man. She's an incredibly high status lady, buried in about 950. And she is buried with a set of artifacts which has led the archaeologists to believe that this lady is a witch or a sorceress. So she has a very small pestle and mortar. She has an ammonite or a snake stone, another apotropaic device, an amulet. She also is buried with a long metal rod, which are often described as magic wands, certainly from the perspective of a Viking vulva, Viking witch. We think they're buried with these wands. Often the wand is bent to really to stop the magical power of the wand, we think. But this lady also had the most amazing suite of jewelry, and she had a set of beads. Some of the beads were over 400 years old when she was buried in them, so this is an antique piece. And she also has jet beads on this piece. So the presence of this jet bead in the Isle of Man, which is the other side of the British Isles in the sort of Irish Sea, is enough to suggest that this woman is a sorceress or a witch. She's buried in a Christian graveyard. She's a pagan burial in a Christian graveyard, but the Christian community are holding this woman in such esteem that they are burying her with honor in a Christian cemetery, but with pagan grave goods. Of course, Christian burials traditionally don't have any grave goods. In fact, the only grave goods we see, certainly in the Middle Ages, are jet artifacts. Jet is the material that is overlooked. It was adopted by the church in the Middle Ages, and we do see jet continuing as grave goods. This item is 14th century, we think, and it is it's not the earliest example, but this is the best example I have to show you of jet used as a magical charm for the protection of a dwelling. So if you remember in that Saxon text, I said that any household that has jet in it, no evil is able to enter. So this goes back to a fear, I guess that's as old as man really, that if you build a dwelling, you're going to have a chimney in it. That chimney, you can lock your doors and you can lock your windows. What you can't do is close off your chimney. And this is where, you know, in the West, children on Christmas Eve, the doors are all locked, but they know Father Christmas, Santa Claus can get in through the chimney. That's the spiritual weak point in a dwelling. So what people would do is, you know, they would worry because if a witch is flying over your house, and she goes over your chimney, she's going to be able to smell you. And if she can smell you, she's going to come down the chimney and she's going to get you. So you're going to have to do something to protect yourself. And you may have heard of witch bottles. So this charm dates from the same sort of period as witch bottles. So a witch bottle, you would take a jar or a bottle and you would put urine in it. You would put anything you have of yourself that was particularly disgusting. So maybe some, I don't know, some pubic hair, or you'll cut your toenails and you're going to put that in. You're also going to put some iron nails in there because they're sharp. We've talked about sharp things. And anything that smells horrible and pungent, you're going to bury those in your hearth and also bury them under the threshold. When the witch comes down your chimney, she's going to be so distracted by the smell of what's in the witch bottle, she's going to enter the bottle and going to get trapped in there, can't get back out. So this is the purpose of witch bottles. This is a witch charm, Whitby jet witch charm, and this is serving the same purpose. You're going to nail this to the side of your fireplace. We also have witch posts in the Whitby area, which serve a similar sort of purpose, and by the door. Now, the earliest jet witch charm I've discovered, I think, is probably 8th to 10th century. This is 14th century, and we know the tradition endures because I have examples that are 17th century witch charms as well. And within the local population, witch charm is still a term that is bandied about. It seems to have entered the usage. Nobody's surprised that we have witch charms out there. So, and curiously, you know, there is no association whatsoever ever through history of witches using jet to do harm. Jet is an amuletic material. It will protect you from witchcraft. And I have lots of pagan friends and lots of whom consider themselves practicing witches, and they all do use jet. That is a modern day development of Wicca or pagan belief. It certainly is not something that's rooted in history. You use jet to stop a witch. You do not use jet as a witch that I have found any evidence of whatsoever. The other thing I wanted to talk about was go back to Spain and, you know, Renaissance Europe, really the jet working centres are Germany, France and Spain, but Spain really is where most of the action is going on. So the Spanish are using one of the oldest amulets in jet. So this device on the right is the front and back of the same amulet, and this is a higa, so that means daughter in Spanish, and it's thought to represent female genitalia. Sometimes it's called a phallic hand. So I don't know why this amulet has 6 fingers. He's got one extra, I don't know why, but the thumb has to poke between the first 2 fingers to make it a higa. And this is a protective device. Obviously we have hand symbols going right back to sort of Egyptian times, but the higa really is probably brought to Spain by the Moors in the 10th century, but the Romans were already using it, to be honest. But these higas are really curious because they mix Christian and pagan beliefs, and fear in the gullible will always be exploited, and nobody exploits fear better than the Christian Catholic Church. So what they do is they take fear in their devoted followers and they really make money out of it. So they make these amulets, and we see pilgrim tokens. But this particular one has the Sacred Heart for a devotion to Christ and sacred to Mary. Definitely a Christian symbol on the palm. But when it's turned over on the back, we have what is believed to be an image of the moon and a 6-pointed star, similar to the hexafoil. Pagan symbolism on the back. So the church here, the maker of this is using pagan and Christian symbols. On the left, we have a portrait painted in 1602 of Anna Maria Mauricia. She's better known perhaps as Anne of Austria. And this child is absolutely spiritually armoured. Every part of her chest and her waist, she has the Sacred Heart over her heart. She has 2 crucifixes. She has coral. She has a bell to ward off evil. She has things that I don't even know what they are. But central, we have a huge jet higa. So this child is being spiritually protected by these amulets in this picture. And interestingly, the higa has a sort of mixed fortunes in Spain. You know, it was pinned to babies because it's seen as obscenity. So if an evil spirit, if the evil eye looks upon a higa, it's going to be so absolutely appalled by the obscenity of the higa that it's going to look away. And also the Spanish believe that if the higa breaks, it breaks for the child. It stops the child being heartbroken or a spell. You know, jet is, because it's soft, and this is believed in other cultures as well, if your jet breaks, somebody has meant you harm and the jet has broke to protect you from that harm. It's quite interesting.
So, and this really kind of shows us how deep the magical belief in the culture was at that time, because if you were not only going to have your child covered in basically magical artifacts, but also have the portrait done that way, you're almost like double imbuing them. We can kind of understand how serious it was to even like whatever, the king's daughter or whoever.
Yeah, I mean, infant mortality was high, you know, sons particularly obviously valued, and, you know, you had to do something to spiritually protect them. It's interesting that in 1525, Charles V unsuccessfully tries to ban the higa. The church adopts it initially, but then does see it as absolute, you know, obscene and tries to ban it. We're told he has no objection against the material, just the higa, but he's unsuccessful. And this next item, this is probably the most important, the most powerful magic device left on the planet today from a jet perspective. This is the Castilian magic belt. So in the same way as Anna of Austria had her belt on, it was common in Renaissance times to wear your magic around your belt, like a sort of chatelaine, I guess. This is 14th century Islamic textiles. The belt, it would fit a small adult. And on it are 10th to 14th century Islamic coins. Again, it's perhaps showing the church's power or defeat over Islam in Spain, you know, the fact they've put Islamic tokens on there. But more importantly, there are 3 chains of jet beads. These are all belong to one original rosary, and the beads are doubly carved. So on one side of the bead is the image of Christ or Mary. On the other side is a skull. So as you are saying your rosary, you're going to be shown, you know, the image of Christ, and then you're going to see a skull, memento mori, remember you are going to die, repent now where you can. So this is a sort of, yeah, a true memento mori artifact. It's telling the wearer that they're going to die and they need to do something now about it. What's hanging from those rosary strings is also quite interesting. So on the right hand side, a really beautiful stylized, probably early 17th century jet higa. The term jet in Spanish is azabache, which is a Moorish word. So it's the only jet name on the planet that does not come from the Latin gagate. So they have their own term for it. Azavici in Portugal, also from the Moorish. In the middle, a crystal skull, anatomically perfect. A little close up, actually, there we go. This is to prevent, this is an amulet that's going to protect you from sudden death. So if you were a devout Catholic, the most terrifying thing you could imagine would be sudden death, because you wouldn't be able to receive the last rites, you wouldn't be able to give a final confession. So this crystal skull, we think, is going to protect you from that. And on the left is a magic horse chestnut conker. So this is European tree and conkers, the seed of a horse chestnut, again amuletic. And it's been treated here as an exotic cabochon. They've made a silver mount for it, and it's treated in the same way as a precious stone. From it are two tiny higas and a token, a symbol of the cult of Mary, cult of the Virgin, also on that one as well. So this is a really powerful device, and this is actually for sale at the minute. It's either in Chicago or New York at the minute, I'm not sure, but I think it's valued at about $150,000. So quite an expensive device even today. And what happened in Spain was these things fell out of favour slightly in the 16th, 17th century, and they began to be looked down upon as pagan, which they are essentially pagan devices on them. So what happened is these things were family pieces, and we see them being given to the church as an ex voto offering to the Virgin Mary, and they become known as virgin belts. So many of them ended up in monasteries. Jet in Spain is concerned really with pilgrim trails during the Renaissance and the Camino de Santiago, the way of St. James, the pilgrim trail. And we're told that St. James, who was beheaded under Herod, his body is taken to Spain, and the ship sinks on the journey, and sometime after, presumably many months after, St. James's body washes up on the shores of Asturias in perfect condition, but covered in scallop shells. So the pilgrim token for St. James is the scallop shell, and these were made in huge quantities, and a pilgrim would do the way of St. James, the Camino de Santiago, from Asturias into Galicia, and buy your token at the end of it. Also, jet in Spain was used by abbesses in the monastery. So on the right is an abbess's collar. These are like ceremonial collars. The abbesses in Spain would wear white tunics, and the black would really stand out. This one has the Sacred Heart on it, showing a wound for the 3 wounds of Christ as well on it. So yeah, that, you know, there's lots of symbolism still in Spain in their amulets. You know, even though they're being used for Christian purposes, the church is using people's, you know, gullibility really and their fear to make these amulets, because, you know, even and it's been interesting researching for this, really look at times of plague and pestilence. Really, you know, we start with fear, and then paranoia develops, as we're seeing now, you know, with the coronavirus. First, we're all scared, and then we start to see conspiracy theories coming out. And, you know, really this is feared by guilt and grief. And then eventually by rage, we're looking for somebody to blame. I fear in the British Isles, it will all be the fault of the British government in the end. We didn't have enough protective, you know, items for medical workers. We don't have enough ventilators. It has to be the government. But it's driven home by revenge. We want to revenge our dead. We want to, and often in these times, the only thing that's going to offer us any protection are amulets. You know, when we are at our lowest point, when grief overtakes, we need an amulet. And that brings us nicely on to what happened in the 19th century in Britain. So most people think of jet in association with Victorian mourning jewellery. In reality, that has been probably a 1-second blip in the probably 30,000 years history of jet as an amulet, as a protective material. But if we scratch the surface slightly, we see that these beliefs are still there from a Jet perspective. So what happens in 1831 on the death of George IV? The Lord Chamberlain's office issues a decree, and they tell us that the British Empire, essentially a quarter of the world's population, is in mourning. They tell us what we should wear, what we should eat, how often we should go to church, how we have to, how we dress our bedrooms, how often we leave the curtain shut. For our entire lives at this point are controlled by mourning. And they also tell us that the ornament shall be jet. Now, in 1831, that meant one thing, that meant Whitby jet. And Whitby goes into absolute boom time. We live in hope again that the British government will say, yeah, everybody has to wear jet. We go from 2 shops to maybe 200 factories. By 1871, the census then says that well over 1,500 people are employed, and they describe their occupation as jet worker, jet carver, some form of jet industry. Interestingly, on that very census, 7 people describe their occupation as sorceress, which is interesting, and it shows the change in thinking towards sort of Gothic sensibilities and a new interest in magic and spiritualism and the seance and everything we think, even necromancy, that we think of from Victorian perspective. But what's interesting with jet, and I don't have time, it's another talk, to looking at Victorian symbolism in their jewellery, but the Victorians invent hidden language, the language of florography. And if you were well versed in this language, you would be able to look at these Victorian pieces and understand what they mean. So the 3 brooches on the right hand side, we've got convolvulus, meaning eternal sleep. So we've got in the middle the acorn for immortality, and on the right hand side, lily of the valley, which symbolizes the return of hope, a flower that comes back every year. So if you were a Victorian person, you would understand what these pieces meant. They're hiding, it's hidden magic within the piece. And we also have the serpent. So we're told right back to 400 BC, burning jet drives away serpents. Now, whether these are physical serpents or metaphysical serpents, we don't know, but it's protective. It's going to protect you. And the Victorians, today I'm wearing a Victorian serpent bracelet there. So that the magic is still existing in Victorian Britain. We're maybe not burning it, not deliberately burning it, but we certainly are putting magic within the pieces if we just look below the surface. And there's another Victorian language that is associated with jet, and that's the slightly lesser well-known language of stones. So we may all know about regard jewellery, where you have a ruby, an emerald, a garnet, and it spells out the word regard using the first letter of the words. In the 1860s, an author comes to Whitby, and he pens a novel which goes on to be the greatest Gothic novel probably of all times, and he understands the language of stones better than perhaps any other contemporary. And what he does is just really interesting. You've got to understand the language of stones when you read Dracula to understand, but what he's doing is setting the scene. He's giving a sense of materiality of place by the choice of gemstones he uses. And of course, when we think of jet, it's something that was once alive, that is now it's now preserved for all immortality in death. Essentially, jet is in a vampiric state. So I would argue that the gemstone jet gives us the Lord of Darkness himself, Dracula. But this is really, that's the Victorian thinking, that jet is sinister. It certainly isn't something we see prior to 1831.
Well, and that also has a lot to do with the worldview of the Victorians, right? Like they were kind of thinking that even looking at the natural world was somehow a sort of deviant, or even like looking at a mountainous scene would sort of corrupt your soul a little bit because it was so wild and primal.
Yeah, they yes, you're right. They in one hand they're obsessed with these dark, the dark. It's like hiding behind a cushion when you're watching a horror film, isn't it? They want to know, they want to, they want to believe in magic, and yet they very much don't. It's and I guess that's why it becomes eventually stage tricks and apparitions of sheets and things. But yeah, there's still magical thinking there, I guess, behind the scenes. And it's interesting really that has in a way passed on. So just a quick note, and I think you had a slide on modern usages of jet from a magical perspective.
Yeah.
And
Well,
all
I also
these,
thought it was kind of interesting, the Victorian period. I was just learning about this for this talk, but the Victorian period is so interesting in terms of magic because they're so, we're already in a period that's so scientific, like they're already at the point where electricity is invented, but then suddenly they're kind of going back to these Renaissance ideas and
yep,
and looking at like, how can one thing internally affect something externally, this sort of as above so below, which
yep,
is a very Renaissance magic idea. And but they're sort of combining that with what is now becoming the modern world with electricity and this new way of life that now we're so used to. But I just thought such an interesting period of time in terms of magic and the occult.
yeah,
And
like
it really is setting the seeds for everything that's going to come in the 1900s and in today, which is I think where you're just about to go.
was, yeah. Yeah, it's strange today. So part of what we do in our shop, I mean, we are traditional lapidaries, so we just manufacture jewelry. We're working jewelers as well, but we do have a side of our business that is concerned with mourning jewelry essentially, but memorial pieces more crucially. So we do two things. So we manufacture grave goods, and I don't suppose there are many people really in modern day, certainly not in Britain, that are requested to make grave goods. And often it's a single bead we make, because obviously people say what can we throw in the grave, and often people that have roots in Whitby want a little piece of Whitby with them. So sometimes many of the people that live in Whitby today have Viking ancestry. So we tend to make a single bead and encourage them to put it in the foot of the grave, and this seems to bring real comfort, even though these are Christian burials and technically grave goods wouldn't normally be included. But the family said, oh, everybody thought that was a nice touch to put some jet in the grave. The other thing we do, and it is a booming business, is memorial jewelry, in which we are interring ashes of people and hair in the same way as the Victorians do. And the Victorian mourning jewelry, I should have said, served three purposes. The first purpose is it's a memento of the dead. In the same way, perhaps like Mexican culture celebrate Day of the Dead, and Victorian culture, their mourning piece is to celebrate the person. And I don't know whether, if you just, let me see, can you see me as well? So I don't know if you
Yeah, there you
can
go.
you see, can you see that? Is
Yeah.
it blocked? So this is a Victorian mourning brooch, and if I open it up, you'll probably see we have a photograph of the deceased there, but what we also have on this side is a lock of the deceased hair. So what we're seeing here is we're actually putting a piece of the bodily remains of this person and hiding it, so it's hidden, in the same way, I guess, as a reliquary would be. We're putting something that is intrinsically personal to that person. This also has the initials TS on it, so we have something and again it's sort of a hidden, I can just about make out TS. So we've got sort of a charm, we've got his name on there, we've got a piece of his body inside, we've got a visual representation of the dead on this, and we've put it in an amulet, and it's made from a talismanic material. And this is what the Victorians tended to do. So they're using it as a memento, a souvenir of the dead, but secondly, it's also a memento mori. It's to remind you that you are going to die as well. You're carrying your dead husband's hair and his picture around with you, and this is going to remind you at all times to be pious and that you are going to die. The third thing with Victorian mourning jewelry is this is status dressing. So this is a status symbol, and we tend to, sometimes people say to me, oh, jet's so awful, it's so big and it's so black and it's vulgar. And this is, the good pieces of jet are comparable, if not better, with any lapidary craftsmanship I have seen at any museum anywhere in the world. So our portrait medallions, the ability to carve cameos. We know that cameo carvers were coming over from Italy to carve in Whitby. You know, these are masterpieces of lapidary skill that we see in these Victorian pieces. So you would want to emulate the courts. All the major courts of Europe adopted mourning in the same way as the British did. So these were the most high status things. And this lasted for 75 years. When the mourning industry collapsed, it collapsed absolutely catastrophically. And it almost went from overnight, you would be wearing this as status, high status jewelry, to literally you would not be seen dead in these items. So the collapse was absolutely disastrous from Whitby, and many of the best craftspeople ended up in Whitby Workhouse, where the poor would be sent. So yeah, it collapsed in a really catastrophic way. And it's taken, you know, within living memory, the people in Whitby would have remembered relatives in the workhouse and how it collapsed. And because of that, the local population here today does not value Jet in perhaps the way they should. We don't understand the history. They don't understand the culture, because nobody really has researched it in a way looking at the cultural significance, the material culture of Jet as a material. But today, as I was saying, we are still making these pieces, and the Victorians didn't put ashes in the jewelry in the way we do. But people, I guess, really cremation is a very difficult concept for us today. You know, burial is pretty final, but it's done there and then. The coffin's in the ground. You've said your goodbyes. You know where your loved ones are. What I'm seeing more and more in Whitby is that people cannot part with the ashes. They intend to, and Whitby's a place that, from a spiritual perspective, means so much to many different people. It's, you know, people say the ley lines all convene in Whitby. You know, it has these ancient links with Glastonbury, another place in the British Isles that has these spiritual connections. And many people want to come here and have their ashes sprinkled here. And before they do so, almost like a pilgrim token, they want to have some of those ashes put into a piece of jewelry. The problem they have then is they still can't part with the ashes, in my experience. And sometimes I've had to go and sprinkle the ashes for them because they can't bear to do it. And sometimes we've had 3 or 4 people's ashes overnight with us in the shop. And it's taken my role from a lapidary to almost somewhere between a sort of mortician and a I don't know, a shaman, in that I'm doing this sort of weird, it's not a magical act, but I feel a real responsibility when we make these pieces that we have to get it right.
It almost is sort of a magical act if you compare it to that sort of prehistoric, you know, where we started the story at, the way that they were using it in a sort of ceremonial purpose. I mean, it wasn't magic in the way that the Renaissance magicians were thinking, but in a sort of shamanic, primal way. It is. So
Yeah.
outside of this new grave good world, what else is going on in terms of modern uses? I found a ton of stuff as I was, you know, looking for, you know, because of course now you can find a million books that say a million things about what different stones do. But
Yeah.
what do you think? Do these modern ideas of what Jet does, are these connected to traditions, or is this sort of just new age invention?
No, I think this is, I hardly dare say it, because obviously a lot of my customers have these sorts of beliefs. You know, I'm a scientist. I don't know many gemologists that have any belief in crystal healing. You know, I know that crystals emit energy. They do that for, you know, we can scientifically explain why, you know, quartz movements work, etc. And often, you know, magic comes from not understanding the materials. You know, anybody who studies crystallography understands how these materials work. And yeah, most of this, I would say, is new age mumbo jumbo. It's not rooted in any ancient beliefs. You know, we've got one there about hysteria and epilepsy. Whoever wrote that's gone on Wikipedia and, you know, essentially copied what Pliny wrote. And Pliny is quoted more than certainly I am from a Jet perspective. You know, I feel I'm competing with Pliny almost every day, you know, to try and change the modern thinking, and it's really, the jet is so under researched. You know, we know less about jet than any other gemstone group, and to have a material in the 21st century which still has not given up its secrets, you know, we still have a cult, you know, we have hidden secrets inside jet. We don't really understand the triboelectricity, we don't understand the chemical structure, we don't understand what allotropes of carbon we have. So there is a lot of science yet for me to do in this subject. And, you know, in a way you feel like, you know, these, you know, the people that have gone before that have written about it, because we're looking for the unknown. I am looking for the unknown in this material, and that's exciting, I guess. But most people that come from Whitby, and these are just some of our items that you found on our website, they're coming on a pilgrimage because they come to Whitby, and many of them have never heard of Whitby jet. They've all heard the term of jet black, which allegedly was coined by Shakespeare, but they've not heard of the material. They don't know the saying jet black comes from the material Whitby jet. But by the time they've been here a week, they need some. They'll say, well, I need some, I have to buy some jet. So we're relying on almost our own little pilgrim trail here. And obviously we do have a fantastic Dark Age saint, St Hilda, who set the day for Easter as today, as I said, if you were listening when we first started the talk, here in Whitby. So yeah, I mean, I think people are coming on little pilgrimages and buying their amulets, you know, taking it away with them. And Whitby jet means so much to so many people. You know, we have people from all around the world. Usually we're lucky enough to have global tourism in Whitby, people coming to buy jet. Hopefully we will, you know, that will resume once this current lockdown is over. But yeah, I think there's still magic in jet for sure.
Yeah, it seems like I didn't, you know, when I proposed this talk to you, I didn't really realize how deep this story can go. It seems to me now like jet must be one of the most magical stones in history in terms of not only its longevity and use, but also the variety of ways that people, you know, all the things people have attributed to it, from, you know, burning it to ingesting it to carving crosses to carving, you know, even older symbols of spiritual or religious beliefs. I just can't believe how much we just went over. I didn't know almost any of this stuff. So crazy.
We could go on forever. You know, there are recipes for exorcisms. There are, you know, certainly in the medieval lapidaries, and you probably know, just in that, you know, you've got occult lapidaries, you've got medicinal lapidaries, you've got Christian lapidaries, and many of them have not been translated and from the Old English, or the, you know, whether they're written in Old German or whatever, or they were translated in the really early 19th and 20th centuries. And if these texts aren't translated by lapidaries or gemologists, then often the translation isn't particularly accurate. So, you know, there is work to be done. Somebody needs to go back and look at these medieval texts and see what else they can tell us. But yeah, the story is much bigger than this. We can't even begin to scratch the surface, other than I would say that, you know, jet culturally is, to me, potentially as important as jadeite is to the Chinese. And, you know, I don't say that lightly. You know, coloured gemstones, to me, don't really come into play to the Renaissance till we can cut them, as your research has been looking at. You know, but before that, we have this material and amber and, you know, ivory. You know, these three materials are the oldest sort of amulets we see, really.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's crazy. Well, I want to thank you so much for being here. I don't want to go on too much longer because somebody even already said it's almost 2 a.m. in Australia. So, but if anybody has any questions, now is the time. We did have one question during the talk. You sort of touched on this for a second, but I didn't want to stop you. Someone had asked, is there an overlap between the jet trade and the amber trade? You know, when you're talking about the Vikings and the Silk Road, what's the relationship between jet and amber, if there is one?
I think the relationship is, from a Viking perspective, that they probably thought jet was a rare black amber. That makes perfect sense. And certainly we see them doing very similar things with jet as they're doing with amber, its beads and its finger rings. The black and the yellow look fantastic together. So we have evidence of amber working in Jorvik, Viking York, where it looks like they're combining jet and amber. And then we have these amulets in Scandinavia, which there's no natural source of jet that we know of in Scandinavia. And then we have these artifacts in Persia on the end of the Silk Road as well. So there is probably an overlap, but until I have that provincing tool to see where this jet is from, I can't really, expand on that story at the minute. But there almost certainly will be an overlap, yeah.
And I think you just sort of answered this one, but I'll ask it anyway, just to see where you go with it. Somebody just asked, are the beliefs of jet similar all over the world, or is this kind of solely concentrated in the Whitby or even in Britain?
No, this is a really interesting thing, really. So I've got good colleagues that I speak to in Venezuela. Not many people know there's probably 500 jet workers in Venezuela that are still making a living there working jet, but they have contact with some of the shaman of the Yanomami tribes in the Amazonian Venezuelan rainforest. And it's been really interesting that through my friend Tito, I've been able to ask these people questions. So when I ask them, why do you use it? Why is jet important to you? Because we know they're using it, some of these uncontacted tribes, they tell us three things. The first thing is they use it for hunting magic. So there's no point going hunting unless they've carved an amulet of jet in the animal that they want to hunt. So that 100% is the same as in the Ice Age European tribes. Secondly, they fear snakes, but not snake bite. So in order to protect themselves from snake bite, they wear jet around their neck. That is completely analogous with what the Greek philosophers, what the Roman writers, and what we believe, certainly in medieval Europe, certainly British perspective, jet protects you from serpents. And then thirdly, they tell us they have such a high infant mortality rate that they burn jet in the longhouse because jet has the ability to absorb sorrow from the environment. So those three things are almost identical to our belief system in Europe regarding jet. So these are populations that apparently would have had no cross-cultural links, and yet we all believe the same thing. So is this a case of the material defining what we do with it, or has there been connections and links in the past that we simply don't understand today? But yes, we're all using it for the same purpose.
Yeah, so interesting. And I mean, because we're talking about this topic of magic and occultism and mysticism, who knows? I mean, maybe for the people that are potentially tuning into other levels of consciousness, maybe the jet really does speak to them in the way that, we can read that native people would have found out about, like, which herbs help you and which herbs kill you. They usually say that the herb tells them or the plant tells them, and in this case maybe the stone tells them in some way that we can't necessarily understand.
It's definitely not going to kill you. I'll go that far. Whether I could recommend it, I don't know. But yeah, I do believe it's talismanic. I mean, I'm not, even though I'm a manufacturing jeweler, I'm not a big jewelry person. I'd rather have shoes any day of the week. But for me, jet is talismanic, and it gives me, when I'm wearing it, I feel that, I wouldn't do a talk today without my jet on. I'd feel, oh my goodness, I feel it gives me something. I don't know what it is, and I don't believe in crystal healing, and I'm not saying it's that sort of feeling. It's more, it gives me an energy because I think it's beautiful and it feels nice and it's tactile, and it just gives me a feel-good factor. So yeah, I think there's definitely, the jet does tell us something for sure.
Yeah. Somebody asked, why did the jet industry and the mourning industry collapse so fast? Why did it go out of fashion so quickly?
I don't know whether any of my Spanish jet working friends are watching, but it really, two reasons. Firstly, we ran out of Whitby jet, and we imported 20 tons of jet from Spain, from Asturias. Now, the Spanish jet, their best quality jet is absolutely as equal to our Whitby jet. So they are the most stable and durable true jet materials that we have. But they didn't sell us that. What they sent us was absolutely appalling. But because we bought it, we spent good money on it, we were going to use it. And we did use it. And this particular jet type they have in Spain is riddled with the mineral pyrite, pyrite decays, and it just wasn't stable in our damp northern British climate. So the artifacts, the things they'd made, failed very quickly. So it started to bring disrepute on the Victorian jet industry. The other thing that happened was the need for a jet simulant was so high that we started, first of all, we started tinkering with natural organic materials. So we get semi-synthetic biopolymers, pressed horn, vulcanized rubber, early plastics made from milk, early plastics made from blood, many other, French jet, which is cast glass. And then eventually in 1907, Leo Baekeland discovered phenol formaldehyde, and that was the end from a jet perspective. The Bakelite Corporation retailed Bakelite as jet till 1944. And everybody fell in love with this new material, plastic. They fell out of love with jet. Bakelite was cheaper, it was quicker to produce. And actually, Bakeland himself said he had improved on nature. He had produced, it was an alchemical act. He saw his discovery of plastic as alchemy, and there are many articles written on that subject. So they took this material that, I should have mentioned as well, from an alchemy perspective, jet was considered a really leading contender for the Philosopher's Stone during the Renaissance because of its unusual properties. But Baekeland says he's achieved, alchemy, and he's transmuted a subject of the fourth kingdom. So plastic is the, mineral, animal, vegetable, and plastic. So we couldn't compete with plastic. That was it, game over. And really, the industry today, we are in a boom time, and we were very lucky. People still come here and they want to buy jet. And we're really trying to recover from that collapse even today, really. And, part of what I do is go around the world and talk to people about this amazing material and hope they actually want to come and buy some. So, if you need a jet amulet, head over to my website, or, follow me on Instagram, Jet Rock Girl, because a lot of my new information I put on Instagram because I want to share these discoveries, and I want the world to fall back in love with this material.
Well, I know for me that sort of did happen. And I think even tonight with this talk, I'm kind of more interested than I was. I kind of want to get some of my rough jet out and burn a little bit just to try that one out. But then maybe, I'll get some of these old cabs that I never finished and start playing around with them. A couple more questions just before we end it. Well, first of all, someone said, where does the name Ybor come from your shop?
So the first jet factory that we know of was in Eboracum, which is the Roman name for York. So I was born and grew up in York, and before I got the shop in Whitby, we were the Ybor Jetworks. So anybody in the world that has the term Ybor, and I know lots of Australians have Ybor House and they have towns called Ybor, anywhere in the world with Ybor in the name means that somebody came from York. So essentially, I like to think we are the original Jetworks. Ours dates back to the 3rd century AD. So I'm just continuing the Roman tradition of having an Ybor Jetworks, basically.
Cool. And someone had asked at one point, the manuscript that you showed, I think they were talking about the manuscript with the deer.
Yeah.
When was that from again?
512.
512, okay.
It's Dioscordes Codex, and it was probably rewritten, recopied in Istanbul, in Constantinople, in 512. So that's the first image I've been able to find.
Okay, so cool. Okay, well, thank you so much, and thank you to the audience. That was we kind of went wild there and didn't really try to keep it in any time frame, but for me, I thought it was super interesting, and I didn't know almost any of the stuff that you said. So I'm really happy. Thanks for the time, and thanks to all of our attendees for hanging out. If you guys want to see more of what Sarah's doing with her research, with her jet cutting, with her jet jewelry, she's got a ton of cool Instagrams. The new one that she just started is the whitbyjet.archive on Instagram, which was where this video comes from right here. She's just got all kinds of cool, it's basically museum pieces that she's curating on this Instagram. And then of course, if you want to buy her stuff or see what she's making, the Ybor Jetworks on either Instagram or the website. If you want to follow more of the gem cutting history stuff, feel free to check out my Instagram. And of course, Institute of Gem Trading, we've got the gem cutting courses here in Bangkok. whenever, of course, we're currently closed because of the virus, but whenever things get back to normal, classes will resume. But yeah, I just want to say thanks again to Sarah. That was awesome, and glad that we were able to connect here on Zoom and make a little connection between Bangkok and Whitby again, because yeah, I visited you already 2 times, so
You
now
have.
we're visiting
Thank
on the internet.
you. No, thank you for asking me. It's been absolutely great, and it's just great to know there's so many people with an interest in, something outside the normal realms of gemology, really.
Yeah, yeah, it was kind of a cool, I don't know how many other stones we could have had a whole topic about, sort of the magical tradition with. So this was a bit of a, and I don't know who else I could have asked this question to. So thanks for being the exactly perfect person to talk about stones and magic at the same time. Yeah.